Hey guys, I hope you're having a great week. I'm excited to be able to dig into Mark and Luke with you guys some more today. I won't be touching on the Psalms this time around. As we jump right into Mark and Luke, Mark 11, which you likely just finished reading from last week's portion, marks, pun intended, the beginning of the final section of the book, where Jesus makes a public and royal entry into Jerusalem, confronts the wicked spiritual leaders of the day for their hypocrisy and pride, and then eventually gives his life on the cross and rises again the third day. The common thread that I'd encourage you to watch for this week is all of the different responses we see people have when confronted with truth. And especially, what were the heart attitudes that underpinned those responses? Compare this to where you feel your heart is when you hear truth, especially when it confronts a lie maybe that you've been believing your whole life, or maybe a lifestyle that you don't want to give up. The truth often costs us something: our pride, past lines of thinking, comfort, or our life's plans. But the cost of hanging on to a lie is always more costly long term, though it may be less painful short term to just hold on to that lie. So looking at some examples of what I'm talking about looking for, we can kind of break it into four pieces. First, you have the portion that example comes from. Then you have the person or people responding to truth. And then you have the response itself and the heart attitude driving that response. So first, our portion, Mark 12, 28 through 34, is where Jesus is asked the most important commandment in the law by a seemingly well-meaning religious leader. So the person was a teacher of religious law who had a chance to respond to truth. The response was seemingly an understanding of truth hindered by apathy in application of that truth. And then the heart attitude driving that response seems to be something along the lines of a desire to live in what is comfortable. Or at least that's one of the heart attitudes that can drive that kind of a response. Now, I might be reading a little into the portion, but you get the idea that this teacher of the religious law was genuine in his questioning and seeking of truth, but possibly lacked in the area of acting on that truth. Thus, Jesus' response is essentially that he's on the right track, but he still has room to grow and room to pursue application of the things that he knows in his mind. Now, maybe he felt pressure to conform to the religious leader norm of the day in application of truth, for fear of what others would think of him or losing his position of authority and respect. Now, whatever the reason, Jesus clearly shows us that genuinely embracing truth is to act on that truth. And this more often than not, is going to push us out of our comfort zone. Now, if I'm honest, this is the response to truth that I was seeing in the portion this week that I can relate to the most. Now, I can spiritually have all kinds of biblical discussions with my Christian friends, and I like my pride likes having people think, oh, Justin knows the Bible well. But I find it more challenging to act on the spiritual truths that I say I embrace when it comes to things that get me out of my comfort zone, such as witnessing to a complete stranger in a store or ministering to the dirty and lowly of society as Jesus did. Now, looking at a few other examples here, we see Judas in Mark 14 start making his move to betray Jesus. Now, Judas is the perfect example of the classic double lifestyle. I think a lot of times when we think of Judas, we think, okay, he was the outcast disciple. He was the one bad guy. He was the guy that was always trying to steal money from the poor, kind of clearly the rotten apple. But obviously, it was not obvious who would betray Jesus, because when Jesus says, one of you guys is going to betray me, none of the disciples are instantly like, it's obviously Judas. They all are starting to question themselves and say, well, is it me? So clearly Judas was able to put up a good front, and he was able to externally look like he embraced the truth that he was internally denying. Of course, he couldn't fool Jesus, and there can be multiple heart attitudes that drive this kind of life, this double living, but ultimately they all boil down to pride or selfishness, concern for what other people will think about us, and our outward face looking good, those kinds of things. Now, there are scores of other examples of those who responded to truth in our reading, either negatively or positively. We think of Peter, the other disciples, the woman who anointed Jesus' feet, Pilate, Roman soldiers, criminals, and common people. But I'll just cover one more specific example. The other two examples I've covered thus far have been more negative examples or responses to truth, but there's also been numerous inspiring responses to truth in our portion. One such positive example is found in Luke 3 with John the Baptist. His response to truth was to embrace it and to boldly prepare the way for the one who fully embodies truth to come. He clearly acted on the truth that he said he believed, which shows that he genuinely believed it. I think we're really good at convincing ourselves that we believe something that our lifestyle does not indicate we actually genuinely believe. Now, John the Baptist, he rejected the comforts of this world and instead lived in the wilderness, boldly preaching the truths that ended up eventually getting him martyred. But, before we just think, oh, John was this perfect Christian, I could never be like that, we also read in Luke 7 that John is in prison, likely having a lot of time to think and to potentially doubt. And he sends some of his disciples to Jesus and he asks, are you the Messiah, or should we look for another? I think it's really important for us when we are in moments of being attacked by Satan with lies, we confront those lies with truth. John could have meditated back on how the dove descended on Jesus when he was baptizing him, and the voice from heaven said, this is my son in whom I am well pleased. You could get no clearer example of this being the one that was promised. So I think it's important we see that, first of all, no one's perfect. We see a gracious response from Jesus to those disciples that I'll let you read about this week. And then we also see that it is important to attack the lies and the doubt of Satan with truth. Things that God's done in our past, his faithfulness to us in the past, that we can look back on and remember that God will still be faithful to us now in the dark trials. So what? What do we do with the information we glean from the varied responses that we see to truth as we study this week? For those who rejected the truth, we can learn from the heart attitudes they had prior to hearing that truth that resulted in the rejected truth and the missed opportunity for growth at the least, and at the most, really eternal damnation was on the line for many of these people. And in contrast, we can also learn from the heart attitudes of those who embraced the truth and recognized it and be inspired by their faith and act on it, and learn from how they acted on it and recognize and embrace truth amongst all the lies that Satan throws at us. Now, before I wrap up the video, I want to briefly swing back to Mark to touch on the unique way the book ends. The Bible app does a really good job of kind of covering the alternate endings, so I highly recommend you check it out, as well as the NLT version of the Bible will help you there. All right, I love you guys. Have a great rest of your week.